Welcome to this episode of Twice Told Tales podcast, the Iran-tastic series. Today we're going to talk to Benjamin, who is from the US and currently lives in Tajikistan. So Benjamin, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in California. So I'm from, as you said, I'm from the United States of America. And I grew up there. I converted to Islam when I was 21 years old, and that was in 2007. And a few years after that, I decided that I really wanted to study Persian language. I fell in love with the language and Iranian culture. And I studied it for a few years at Cal State San Bernardino. And then in the process, I met my wife, who is from Tajikistan. And then I moved to Tajikistan. And a few years later, I was invited to study Persian literature at Ferdowsi University in Mashhad. And I just graduated this year. So
Perfect. So
you know,
that's great. So how long did you live in Mashhad, Iran?
5 years.
5 years. Okay. Great. So can you tell me why and how you became interested in the Persian language, and how did you first hear about Iran and become interested in
Mm.
the country and the language?
Yeah, sure. So what's interesting is that I guess there was something about, like, maybe it was the timing that I was born in or something. I was born in 1986, and just like in the place where I grew up, like in my community, in my family, I never heard anything about Iran. Like, I just didn't know anything about it, and so maybe like some Americans, they had heard negative things about Iran because of, the history between the two countries. For me, it was like completely a blank slate. And even the only thing I can remember growing up is my grandfather, who was my mother's father, who was a very interesting person. Um, he and I guess this is typical for maybe older Americans, but he would sometimes mention how Iran had changed its name, right? So he
Right.
sometimes he would tell me, right, he would tell me, like, there is a country that used to be called Persia, but it changed its name to Iran. And I was like, okay, like that's the only thing that I knew about it. And so growing up in our family, we are kind of, we're mixed, but all of my, like, from my mom's side and my dad's side, they're all European. But on my mom's side of the family, through her mother, and her father too, kind of, they're more English. So we grew up. I'm a native English speaker, and we kind of had like some English identity on my mother's side. And just the fact that we were living in Southern California meant that we grew up around things from Asia, right? Like, there's lots of Asians living in California, and so, like, the kind of like the East was like something that we kind of vaguely knew about. And also, I think that the fact that India was part of the British Empire was really hugely influential on the culture of English-speaking people and our language and everything. So, and my parents are baby boomers, and they grew up in the 1960s, so they knew, like, the the Beatles went to India, and they knew, like, Ravi Shankar was like a household name and everything. So we kind of had like this this positive affiliation, at least with Indian culture. And for me, growing up in California, that was all of that stuff was really interesting to me, especially as I grew from a child into a teenager. I was more and more fascinated by foreign cultures, and I wanted to, like, I wanted to learn everything and, like, try every food and everything. And we just had this you know, like, we thought Indian music was great, and sometimes we would see, like, there would be Bollywood movies on TV and so on. When I went to college, I met people at my college who were from Pakistan, and they spoke Urdu. And I started to a little bit. I started to learn about their language, and because of this interest that I already had in their culture, um, I was also attracted to. Once I heard them speaking the language, I was like, this is really interesting because I was always fascinated by language since I was a child. So if I met somebody who spoke another language, which when I was small, I didn't meet many people who spoke a language other than English. Like I was kind of like in this bubble. So when I went to college, it was like I met people from more diverse backgrounds than I had before. So I was meeting all of these people. And I was like, teach me your language. Teach me like a few
Mhm.
words or a sentence or something. And um, I thought that Urdu was particularly attractive, and it was fun. And also, I had studied Spanish in high school, and I was also really fascinated by the similarities that I discovered between, like, you know, like Urdu is spoken in South Asia, and I was like, why is it so similar to Spanish sometimes, right? Like I didn't know anything about linguistics back then, but it was like on my own, I was kind of discovering like the Indo-European language family for myself, and like this was like the coolest thing ever. And it just so happened that not only was I interested in language, but I was also interested in religion. I started when I was 18. I started reading about the religions of the world, and this also like interest that I had in theology and the philosophy of religion, and kind of like even from like a anthropological point of view, it was really fascinating. But then, like, when I was 18 and I started reading about religion, I didn't believe in any religion at that time. I was raised in a Christian household, but at that point, already decided that Christianity wasn't for me. And I was kind of like an agnostic. So I was like, well, I don't know, like, about anything. But then, like, all of the research and personal reading that I did, it kind of rubbed off on me, right? Like, eventually, without an intention of choosing a religion to, like, I wasn't one of those people that's like, okay, I have to find a religion, right? But eventually, I had read so much that I started like building this conviction inside of myself that I wasn't so quick to recognize at first, that I thought that Islam was correct. I thought Islam was the most true religion. And so eventually, by the time I was 21, I basically reached this conclusion that, like, yes, I should become Muslim because that's just who I am, right? So I kind of like I figured out who I was. And then afterwards, I started going to a masjid in Southern California that was mainly attended by Iranians. And so as I just happened to find myself in a community of Persian speakers, I heard them speaking their language, and I was like, whoa, what is this? I've never heard of such a thing before. Like this language was like, it was a total mystery to me. I didn't know anything about Iran. So this, of course, it piqued my curiosity, and I started bugging my Iranian friends, like at the masjid. I started telling them, tell me how to say, like, something in your language. And I once I started learning it, like a few like basic vocabulary and stuff, this like light bulb went off over my head, which was I had already had some experience with Urdu, and I was like, wait a minute, these are so similar. Like, then all of a sudden I noticed that, like, oh, um, Persian Persian is it, right? Like Persian is the thing, the great, like, a great repository of language and literature and culture and poetry and all of that, the richness of Persian. That's the thing that had enriched Urdu so much that, by the time I had heard like all of these Urdu songs and poems, that I immediately recognized that, the really cool thing about this poetry is that it's got Persian in it. And so I just went straight to Persian, and I was like, this is the thing that I want, and but like what I was looking for. And so I could honestly say that Persian was the most attractive language, and as you can imagine, like as a Muslim person who was also close to those communities like South Asian community and Iranian community, I really had this strong feeling and regard for the prestige of the Persian language. I looked at it like it was really something like and this is something that people in some parts of the world, like South Asia, for example, they can really relate to this. That Persian is something that gives you a feeling that if I can speak this language, it means that I am educated and I'm cultured, and I just I loved it, and it was easier to learn than, like, for example, I had in the past, I tried, I studied Arabic a little bit. I studied Urdu a little bit. Those were more difficult languages. But then when I found that, Persian was both um, so much more attractive to me. And on the other hand, it was a lot easier because, the grammar is relatively more simple. So I was
Mm.
like, oh, this is convenient as well, because it's not for me also, as a my native language is also an Indo-European language. I felt this affinity for it, like this is not so hard for me to get into. And also, um, I was living in a community of speakers, so I basically I had the opportunity, right? I was around Persian speakers all the time, so it just everything like perfectly kind of fit together. Like you know, Persian is an Indo-European language, but it has a lot of vocabulary that's taken from Arabic because of the Islamic culture. And me being a Muslim, that was also like that fit right perfectly. So it all came together.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Do you remember some of the first sources that you read about Islam or Iran that were like that kind of made you more curious about Iran and Islam, or that you found that that's something that you want to learn more about?
Oh, that's a good
Something
question.
inspiring. Hmm.
Right. So when I became Muslim, I actually didn't have any Iranian friends. Like I didn't know people. I had maybe sometime I had met an Iranian person before, but like there were two kids in my high school who they were always talking about how they're Persian, right? But they had assimilated so well into American culture and society that you couldn't tell that there was anything different about them. So like I had met Iranians before, and not even realized that they were Iranian, because they didn't speak their language, and they weren't, in some cases they weren't even Muslim. So like by the time I became Muslim, I had met Muslims who were from, Arab countries and from South Asia, for example. Like I knew people who were Palestinian or Egyptian or Pakistani, for example. And there was kind of like not anyone who was Iranian or even Afghan. So I kind of I approached Islam kind of like the first Muslim friends that I had. For the most part, they were Arabs, and I had uh, I had come to Islam by reading the Quran. So I started by reading the English translation of the Quran, and I had read very general basic texts about Islam, like like what is Islam, what do Muslims believe, that kind of basic stuff. Um, but just from the meeting the Muslim people that I knew, which I thought they were very nice people, that they had good character, and they would always would always attribute the positive things in their ethics and their character to their religion. So they would always say that um, this is because of Islam, this is because of Prophet Muhammad. So they would tell me stories about the Prophet, peace be upon him, and I got this impression that, like, okay, these are great people. They have a great prophet, and I need to read the Quran and see, like, what does this book say, right? And then once I started reading the Quran, I was like, okay, this is the Quran contains a message that confronts you, like, right? I was confronted with this, and then I was like, okay, I've reached a crossroads in my life, and I have to make a decision now. So Iranians in Persian, it hadn't yet entered the picture really. But then after I became Muslim, or I decided to become Muslim, I joined a community. I started going to a mosque in Southern California. It happened to be a Shia mosque. It was actually the closest one to the place that I was living at the time. Like it was literally like down the street, and I found it on
Mhm.
Google Maps. So
And
I
that
had
was the
to.
reason you went to. Like you didn't know if it's Shia or Sunni, or
I
you
didn't.
didn't
I
have that
didn't
idea.
know. I didn't know. And in fact, by I went there not knowing that it was a Shia masjid, and just by that time, a tiny bit of the negativity about Shias had rubbed off on me from from some people that I had met or talked to, or in fact, you would see things on the news because remember this was like 2007, so like. Even someone who I wasn't really interested in that stuff very much, but like, I watched TV, and the way they would portray like the United States had invaded Iraq, and then they would show like the Shias in Iraq, and they just make you think that like Shias are radical Muslims, and like I didn't know anything. I knew from from a book that like okay, Shias, they believe Imam Ali alayhi salam is the successor of the Prophet, and the Sunnis went with Abu Bakr. That was it. Like I just had two ideas that they were different from each other in some way that I didn't understand. I thought maybe Shias were more like conservative or extreme or something, and I thought also I had this conviction that it doesn't matter, right? I thought that all Muslims are Muslims, so whether it's a Sunni mosque or a Shia mosque, I don't mind because I am not here to get into like a particular madhab or anything like particular school of thought. I was a new Muslim, so I was like, look, I just want to as a Muslim, I just want to pray and fast, right, and go to Friday prayer and do the normal stuff. And so I thought, okay, Sunni Shia doesn't really matter to me. So by the time that I went to the mosque and after I got there, I realized that this is a Shia mosque. I said. I said, "Oh, it's okay. Like, I respect them equally, and I'll talk to them. I'll see what they say. I'll listen to the khutbah, and I'll if it's good, it's good. If it's not good, I'll just go. I'll find another masjid, right? So anyway, it was a wonderful community. They left a great impression on me. I was like, yes, this is When I met them, I was like, this is the Islam that I had imagined when I read the Quran. I was like, this is what I thought the religion is. And of course, this I didn't, I became Shia, and it wasn't just because I met them, right? I went home and I started reading a whole bunch about it. So then I hit the books and articles and everything. I was like, okay, what is the Sunni position on X, Y, and Z? What did the Shia say about it? And then after studying more, I came to the conclusion. I said, you know what? I agree more with the Shias, right? So I kind of I had this evolution of I became Muslim and then I became Shia, and I wasn't totally familiar with Iranian people, but I was getting to know them slowly through my masjid community. So like the first, and I have to say, when I started going to the masjid. The Iranians who were there, even though I think they were the majority of the community, they were a little bit distant. Like they're kind of slightly closed off as a community, right? There's a little bit of like a maybe an in crowd, and a lot of the people my age who like first like reached out to me to be friends, like as because a convert. A lot of my peers were, they were Lebanese or Iraqi, so I still like hadn't gotten to know Iranians very much, but slowly over the course of like a couple of years, right? I got to, and I did have this I had this interest, right? This motivation of I wanted to learn their language, and I guess I reached a point where I had been in the community long enough where they were then familiar with me, and they appreciated the fact that I loved their culture, that I loved their foods, and I was starting to learn their language, and then all of a sudden there was like this, they opened up, and like all of the Iranian people in my masjid, they all wanted to be friends with me. Like all of the sudden it was like I was like in the group, right? And while I was like going through that journey of kind of like uh, getting close to the community and discovering their culture, I started learning about Iran as a as a foreign country. So on the internet, I would start reading more about Iran, Iranian culture, Iranian history. I watched like at home, I watched all these documentaries. Like I started watching Iranian films, and I started watching like travel logs to Iran. And I just got this, from the outside, I got this vision of like Iran is this really amazing country, right? It's really beautiful, and has like an amazing like rich history and culture, and amazing people, and talented people, and educated people. And this kind of like Iran became like this very like I just loved it. Like I loved Iran. And this was this was way back in like 2000 and like 8, 9, 2010, right? Like I hadn't even any thought of if was it even possible for me to visit Iran, right? It was it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like, but it kind of also didn't matter so much because I had my in Southern California, I had my Iranian community. Like I was in California, I was living in a little version of Iran. It was like I was already there, right? So I just had this in my life, I had this strong connection to Iran. And this obviously it led me down this path of I decided to get serious about learning the language. And I thought like I'll never learn the language satisfactorily until I study. Like I can't just hang out at the masjid like every week and be like, salam chaturi, right? And then just
Mm-hmm.
my Persian hit a limit, and I was like, no, I need to study, right? And I started looking for programs where I could get like a like a real teacher, and learn the language. And I did, just purely out of personal interest, but something which started small. It grew bigger and bigger until like eventually my whole life just became about that, which is by the time that I had finished my courses at Cal State, I had learned to speak Persian. And then all of the sudden I was planning to move to a Persian speaking country and get married to someone who speaks Persian. Like my wife and I, after we met each other, the language that we communicated in was Persian, right? So like we
Great.
spoke Farsi to each other like that since the beginning, basically. And that's
That's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
And you met your
amazing.
wife in California?
Well, sort of. We hadn't met in person. um I was when I was at Cal State San Bernardino, I was teaching myself Tajik alongside Farsi, because the program that I was in, it was all like it was only Iranians. And the program was like, it was like entirely focused on Iran, right? The Persian language is actually a big thing in the world that goes well beyond Iran's borders. But it was a very like Iran centric, community and program, which of course, that was okay with me, because I was also interested in Iran. But then I learned that that there is a country called Tajikistan. And this actually was because I have Slavic heritage. My father's family is Polish. They came from Poland. And so because I had this kind of like, as a Polish American, I had this Slavic identity. I was also interested in, I wanted to learn more about Russia and like in the Soviet Union. That was like really interesting to me, because when I you have to remember, like when I was born, the Soviet Union still existed. And then, but by the time that I was old enough to realize what it is, it had no it no longer existed. So like
Hmm.
I guess the historian in me was like very fascinated by this thing that happened. And so because I was interested in like Eastern Europe, and I was trying to, at one point I started to try to learn Russian as well after I started Persian. A friend of mine who noticed my interest made the suggestion that he's like, oh, Benjamin, I see that you're into Persian, and but if you have an interest in Russian as well, why don't you learn Tajik? And I was like, what's Tajik? I've never heard of such a thing. And so he said, "Oh, Tajik is, it's the Persian speakers who lived inside the Soviet Union. They speak Persian, but they write Persian in the Russian alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet." And I was like, "Wow, that's the most fascinating thing that I ever ever heard of." And so I went and started to, because I already knew Farsi, I started to read, and I had just learned the Russian alphabet, so I was like, oh, I could put two and two together and start reading these texts in Tajik. I ended up joining a Facebook group that was dedicated to Tajik language, and I was active learning it. So I was in the group. I was writing posts in Tajik. I was asking Tajiks to teach me, like, how do you spell in your writing, like, is
Mm-hmm.
this correct, is this correct? And so my wife was in that group as well, so we ended up meeting through Facebook. And it was very, like, serendipitous. But after we had learned of each other's existence, and we chatted a little bit, we asked each other some questions. All of a sudden we realized that people from her family, particularly it was her brother. She said, "My brother lives in California." I was like, "What? Where in California does he live?" "He lives in Orange County." And then I realized that I had met her brother before, that he had gone to my masjid and we had seen each other. And so I was like, oh, it was like she and I were, even though, like, we were living, like, on opposite ends of the globe, it was like we were part of the same community. This is kind of like um, the international, like, Shia community. Is like we come from countries all over the world, but when we meet each other, it's like we're one and the same. Like, I met people from and California is very, very international. People all over the world come from all over the world come to California. So I was always, anytime I met a Shia from another country, I still felt like, this guy is from somewhere completely different, but we have the same way of life. We do the same things. We think the same things. We say the same things, is because of our religion, right? So just feeling this connectedness through the community, it made me think, like, oh, this person is actually a good match for me, except that she lives so far away. So in the beginning, I didn't really think that we there would be much of a chance for us to get married. But as time went by, um, and in fact, at the time that we met, she was studying in Iran. So she was going to Al Zahra University in Tehran, studying English literature. So I was studying Persian language. She was studying English literature. And we finished our studies. She graduated and she moved back to Tajikistan. I had finished the Persian program at Cal State San Bernardino, and I was like, you know what? uh, we should meet each other, right? That's logically the next step. And so I made a plan to travel to Tajikistan. I went there to Dushanbe, and we met each other in person. We met each other for the first time, and then, you know, we met and we talked, and I met her family and I talked to her family, and then after some time, we decided to get married.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really wild that you met her brother before you even knew, and you were able
Yeah.
to
That's
recall
very
that.
That's
Like,
interesting.
that's really interesting.
crazy coincidence. Yeah.
Well,
And it's
like,
also
go
Mhm.
ahead.
Go ahead.
Um,
No, it's
Yeah, and people.
interesting that I knew Benjamin, and I knew like his
Yeah.
wife separately, and I didn't know that they knew each other. And suddenly I
Yeah.
heard that they are married. So it was like, what? How did
wow.
they
How did
met?
that
Like
happen?
where? Because your wife and I were supposed to meet when she was in Iran, but it
Oh
didn't happen
yeah.
when
Yeah,
she was
she
studying
told me that
there. We
story.
talked,
She was
yeah,
like,
and
we
we
we all
met.
we almost met each other, but it didn't
Exactly.
happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but
So
and
it's
you and
like
I knew
they're
each other
the
through Facebook,
best.
right? Like
Exactly. I
that
think it's
that
about the
was
time like 2010 or something, right?
yeah. Yeah,
2010.
Facebook was still like a new phenomenon, and people like people in our
Mhm.
community, they discovered that, like wow, Facebook is like this tool that, like, connects us with each other. This was back when, like, people didn't hate Facebook, right? Like now Facebook is really bad. Nobody likes
Yeah,
Facebook.
it's very different. Yeah, it's very different. I
But
think it
it
was.
was a phenomenon.
Yeah, that's true. I remember like around 2009 and 2010 when there was there was a lot of negative news about Iran
Yeah.
on the TV. I had a lot of friend requests from people on Facebook who wanted to know the truth about what was going on in Iran because I was
Mhm.
living in Iran and I spoke English. So that's when I met a lot of like really interesting people, and I think that's about the time that we became friends on Facebook.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah, yeah.
Facebook was very, very different at that time. It was like really useful and it was very different.
Yeah, at that time, I can remember when I started going to Cal State San Bernardino. It was 2011, and just around that time, I can remember I was so stressed out because I thought that there was a very good chance that the United States was going to go to war with Iran. And I don't know if you remember clearly like what it was like in 2011, but things got really bad. And I was thinking like, oh God, I hope nothing happens, right? And then like eventually things went in a more positive direction. Like, and I breathed like a big sigh of relief. I was like, oh, like now, like I can rest easy that, Iran is safe, basically. And
Yeah.
yeah, but
But
I
we
also,
sorry.
sorry.
No, go ahead. No,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
probably this is probably going to come up eventually, but I also wanted to mention that the years that I spent in Iran, it was from the very beginning of 2017 until now, which was basically like almost the entirety of Donald Trump's presidency was when I was in Iran. So I had the timing was so strange that when I got my visa to study at Ferdowsi University, when I went to Iran, Obama was still president, and the JCPOA was still in effect, and every like the atmosphere was so positive. Like everybody thought, like what, things are going to be great, right? And then all of the sudden, after I got there, things just went horribly, completely wrong. And I think um, if I had applied like a year later, I might not have been able to study there. But since I was already there, and everything was cool. Like I had my residency and my visa, so then I was able to stay and continue my studies. But really, that was a dark chapter in the history of like relations between. I mean, it's all one long dark chapter anyway. But anyway, yeah, it was terrible. So 2011 was another time where like things were bad, and then they looked like they were getting better again, and then
Mhm.
you know
Yeah, that's true.
that
You phrased
happened.
it
Yeah.
as things went wrong, and I just like to pose the possibility that maybe it's actually the way they want it to go, because we have Biden. He has full control of everything now, the
Mm,
Democrats, and they have no interest in pursuing anything that looks positive. So I think perhaps
yeah,
they do go on these cycles of threat and relaxation and threat and relaxation to just keep the pressure and the tension up.
yeah,
So I don't know if
Absolutely.
it's actually something that we can blame on Trump. I mean, he's definitely a deplorable politician
yeah.
like Biden, but
He played his part, but the what the United States does that's wrong to Iran, like for example the sanctions, that's way older than Trump, so you can't blame
exactly.
him for everything.
Yeah, and I would
Yeah,
say the
exactly.
Democrats and Republicans are kind of a fake divide that are meant to kind of shield each other from blame, but the pressure is coming from a deeper root um,
Yeah,
in the U.S. And I would love to get your commentary or your feelings on, as an American, because I mean, you were in one of the most like I would say culturally from an American standpoint, you think of like the Valley Girls or whatever. I mean, in Southern California, you have some of the most brainless, stereotypically American cultural communities
sometimes, yeah,
sometimes. So like I'm saying, you
sometimes.
come from an area that is like can be easily like classified into this kind of lowest common denominator of Americana, and so I
Mm,
would just love to know how you would communicate to that kind of group both what Islam means to you and why it's so appealing to you as a person, why it might be appealing to them, and yeah, as a religion, as a cultural influence, and then how you envision the dynamic between the West and the East in terms of like kind of the ideas of cultural ideas of freedom. Like I know having lived in Central Asia myself, like the idea of freedom when you live in government that's a weak government that has very little power over the people. In many cases, you can feel extremely free, whereas in the U.S. every day it seems like we're encroaching on less freedoms as we every day I wake up and I see that my country is less free. And so I don't know if you could just, there's a kind of a lot of things to talk about, but you go with whatever you want on there. But I think Islam, culture, and politics, how that relates between the East-West divide would be interesting.
Oh, that's really broad. Well, I'm the kind of person who I kind of like, part of my life is like I'm from, what you would call the West, like I'm from California. But I had this long journey of like feeling this, this connectedness and kind of like, um, I don't know, it's kind of like bridging across the divide, where it's having this experience as someone who, I learned an Eastern language. I got into like like kind of like adopted Eastern culture, and I moved. I went and I lived in Asia. All right, like I lived for years in Tajikistan, and I lived for several years in Iran, and I always would focus on the things, the many things that we have in common. Like there's so much that connects us and brings us together, and a lot of it is in our history actually. So like you can kind of see that, for example, the culture of people in Europe used to be in the past, culturally they used to be much more similar to people in the Middle East, and they've kind of like been moving further and further apart recently. But it's not a black and white thing, right? It's not like totally across the board like we're completely different. It's kind of like like I grew up in a family that we still remembered like some of our like European culture and heritage, and we came from a Christian background. And so like when I became Muslim, I found a lot that was familiar actually, like there's a lot of things in Islam that I had learned growing up from my family, or I knew some things about, European history and culture, and I realized that we had this, right? Like when I started living as a Muslim and seeing like, experiencing all the things that Muslims do, some of the things that we did were things that were not unfamiliar. So like I'll give you a couple examples, right? So on my mother's, actually on both sides of the family, they, because my dad's Polish and my mother is her mother was her mother's father was French, and it's kind of worked out that they were all Roman Catholic. So like the whole, like both sides of the family were Catholic, and I knew a little bit about the history of Catholicism, right? Like things that my mother had told me and my grandmother, and things that I read about. So you had like, for example, the Second Vatican Council was in the 1960s. So I wasn't alive at that time, but my mother was alive. She was a teenager, and my mom told me that she remembers when they went to church, when they went inside the church, they had to cover their hair, right? They had to wear what they call the chapel veil. And so my mom is old enough that when she was young and went to church, they had to wear, what in Farsi, what they call rusari, like they had to cover their hair, like or you would call that a hijab in popular English, a head covering, headscarf. And when I read about how this changed, why it changed, at the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church decided that this was one of the things that they were going to change about their services. And there were a couple other things that they changed, which is for example, when they would have mass in the church, it used to be that everyone faced the same direction. So the priest would face in one direction, and everyone behind the priest would be facing in the same direction, which is what we do as Muslims when we pray together. And also they prayed in their liturgical language, which was Latin, at least in this this rite of the Catholic Church. I guess it's the Roman rite. And so my mom, when she was a kid, she was going to religious services where she had to cover her hair, and they all faced the same direction, and they prayed in the language of, basically, I'm not don't want to draw too much of a parallel here, but basically they're praying in the language of their holy book. And that was something that, in the United States, it was more normal in the past, and now you have people who they never heard of such a thing. They're like, what? We never, they look at Muslims and they're like, oh, Muslims are so weird. Like they do these like really different things that we don't do. But it was like 50 years ago that a lot of the things were more similar. Or like, for example, sometimes people they think that gender segregation is a problem. Like in American culture, they don't tend to regard gender segregation too fondly. But just like a few decades ago in the United States, that was a lot more normal than it is now. I mean, the U.S. had colleges and universities that were particularly for women, right? So they even, in our country, we even had gender segregated universities. And I wish that people would understand that in a lot of these ways, even if it's just historical, we have a lot more in common, or had a lot more in common than they think. They shouldn't regard people in the United States. They shouldn't regard Muslims as really so strange and distant from them. In fact, you can find people from some other parts of the world that are even more different from the average American than a Muslim person is. But they kind of just have a prejudice which says that my society tells me, or the TV tells me, that Muslims are the most, they're the most different, and they're strange, and we don't have anything in common with them. But I of course I would invite people to become Muslim and to join me in my faith, right? Like Islam is an open faith, and of course I have a lot of positive things to say about it. But even for there's people who won't become Muslim, but if they choose not to become Muslim, I hope that they, at the very least, they could regard Islam more positively. You know what I mean? Like they should learn that we're not so different. We can be coexist, basically.
Well,
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
it's not some exotic religion that has that's very different from other religion or something like that. Yeah, because that's what many people in the West probably think of Islam.
but I think also, like, religion tends to, there's a cultural component, like you were saying, the community that you got involved with was really important to you. And so I would say
Absolutely.
that, like, I would just stimulate conversation by postulating that perhaps it's the West that has been diverging away from traditional values and away from traditional lifestyle of and spiritual lifestyle of most of Eurasia. And so the Western sort of this cultural, I don't know how to describe it, but like the postmodern kind of bizarreness that we see evolving every day is Islam, and the cultures around Islam has sort of tried to put the brakes on and kind of maintain some kind of stability, and the West is sort of kind of falling away from that. And so I don't know if you have any observations on that, living in 3 different countries.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit complicated. So like, I maybe without going into too much detail, right? It does seem that like in more recent times in the United States and maybe in Western Europe, so like in the past maybe like 20 years or 30 years, they've kind of maybe like socially or morally or ethically, they've kind of like diverged quite a bit from what's more normative in the world, basically. And I think a lot of people in America, they maybe don't really understand that like sometimes there's issues like social issues that they feel really strongly about. They feel like because of the I don't know, the social or political atmosphere in the United States, they feel like uh, there's a certain thing, like it has to be this way, and everybody has to get on board with this and support this, and they kind of maybe don't understand that like most of the people in the world don't really, like, they can't relate to that. it doesn't, like, it kind of doesn't make sense. And growing up in the United States, I was a kid in the 1990s. I kind of felt like at that time, there was kind of this still like, as maybe as different or similar as the United States was from the rest of the world. At that time, it's still kind of felt like most, at least I could be totally biased. Like this could just be like my naive point of view that I had when I was a child. But I thought that the United States was kind of more of a normal country. Like we were kind of like staying with like mostly within the I don't know. I don't have the language to talk about this very well. Things were okay, and then like it seems as time went on. Now that I'm much older, right? Like I'm 35. Um, I lived through these different decades, like the 90s and the 2000s and then the 2010s, and like now in the 2020s, I look at America and I'm like, this is not the society that I grew up in even, and I just don't understand. Like, they recently they just gone like way out there, and so I don't know. Not sure what to
Well,
tell you, but yeah.
I could add this just interesting. It's like, because we're both concurrent in our experiences with America, and I would say that, the war on terror narratives, where it was basically the conservatives sort of uniting against
Oh,
Islam, which
that was
it's
horrible.
very
Yeah.
ironic, because what I see now is I see that conservatives have so much more in common with the Muslim world and with Muslims in general, especially
Mm.
Christian conservatives, than the liberals or the that this interesting divide we have in the West between the people who want to kind of maintain a stable society and maintain sort of uh, uh, cultural and social norms, has is competing with this new kind of other agenda, and
Mm.
I just see so much possible unity between the quote unquote conservative, whatever that means in the U.S., but
Mm.
the religious Christian conservative group. It's bizarre to me because culturally they seem very connected in that they both basically want to have a stable existence, and
Mm.
during the war on terror there was much divide there, and I don't see that so much anymore. I see there's still quite a bit of issues with racism, but it's I think there's a potential window for that. I don't know if you see any of that kind of dynamic, that the left seems to be really
Yeah.
or the whatever we call the left, this progressive. I don't even like that term because I come from the
Yeah,
West, so I don't.
I got you.
Yeah, so it's
I
hard to even
got
talk
you.
about that. But you have any comments on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not really fond of the way politics works in the United States. So I'm not really happy with like there is this very stark polarization where there's this concept of like there's a liberal and a conservative side, and these two concepts have like taken to represent they've come to represent things that like as a Muslim, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because you have these impossible choices, which is, if I go with these guys, there's this some of it's if it's is good for me, but there's this major problem here. And then on the other side, it's the same thing. Like you look at the other side and you're like, okay, these guys have some things, but then you're like, but this part is really problematic, right? So it's kind of like, um, as a Muslim, I kind of felt like the only people who we agree with is we can generally agree with is ourselves. Um, but no, of course that we can find some bridges to build between us and other communities. But yeah, it's really difficult. For example, since the time that I was old enough to vote, which was I guess 2004 maybe was the first presidential election that I voted in. Um, the main problem that I had with conservatives, and it's not that I disagreed with like too much with every like they had like an economic policy or a social values, economic values. I could understand that like you know um, maybe I didn't agree with all of it 100%, but it kind of made more sense to me. But then the thing that really put me off was that since the time that I was of voting age. The whole platform, the entire Republican platform, when they, at least when they were running, like presidential campaigns and stuff, was that it was all you vote for us, because if you don't vote for us, those evil foreigners are going to come and destroy our country. And
Exactly.
and I'm
So
a very like,
can I
yes,
interrupt you for a second? Hold that thought.
yes,
That's exactly what we have now with the Democrats. They're
yeah.
exactly saying the same thing. Vote for us now, or evil
About
Putin will
Russia
take
and
over.
China.
They've
Yeah,
yeah. So
exactly.
sorry, I just wanted to just make us aware that this is right.
Yeah,
So
I
go
mean
ahead with what you're saying.
they can use xenophobia in different ways, right? I mean, um, I because I live in Tajikistan, I don't have that positive view on Russia, but I kind of look
Yeah.
at I kind of look at United States and Russia as kind of like they're both kind of doing the same things as each other. So like I'm not trying to pick sides between them or anything, but yeah, you can tell that like whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, they can try to use xenophobia as a social force that can help them to win elections. And I always this was always so off-putting to me that that's like how Donald Trump got elected. I mean, it was basically the Republicans. They tried it again and again and again, like they never stopped until finally Republican won the presidential race. And that's what all Donald Trump was saying, was that if you don't vote for me, people who are not white, people like from Mexico and the Middle East, they're going to invade our country, they're going to rape you, they're going to do like literally they were saying this stuff, and I was like, oh my God, right? Like, because I always loved people from not from all communities. Like, I was always happy to like when I was growing up in California, when I met people from other countries, I was like, you guys are so interesting and amazing. Like, I had this really positive regard towards people from all around the world, and kind of like I love to celebrate like the diversity and cultures and everything like that. And of course I had eventually had moved outside of the United States, so I was already living in another country. And Tajikistan, by global standards, is a very poor country. So it's a country that because of poverty, someone in the United States would, from a distance, they would look at a country like Tajikistan and they would say like, oh, that's not, that's a bad country because like they're not, I don't know, they're not materially wealthy or something. But anyway, I had a lot of experience already talking to people from around the world. And, I grew up with the internet, right? Like, the internet connects us. So having all of that, I was like the opposite of xenophobic. I was like, I loved, I don't know, I
Genocide.
loved, yeah, I loved foreign
Yeah.
things. And then I moved to, I moved across the globe, and I started living here in Central Asia. And I was like, you know what? I finally I lived outside America, and I learned the language that people speak here, and I just talk to people. Like, I can go out and I can just talk to someone on the street, or I can go to the grocery store and I can have a conversation with the shopkeeper or taxi driver, and people are the same. They're just like, they think all the same stuff that everyone in the world, like, people are people basically. And um it's kind of, it's kind of sad that people can really get so divided against each other about things like, like nationality or language or things like that, when when I just felt like, when I would go back and I would talk to some of my American friends that would, they would espouse these kinds of views, that they had some really negative opinions of, about immigrants, for example. And I told them, I said, look, I hate to break it to you, but uh, people from America, like us, like me, right? I was born and I grew up in the United States. People like us are not better than people who grew up in another country in any way. Like, we're not smarter than them. We're not like, we're not more cultured, or like we don't. it's just this all became so strange to me that the longer that I spent living outside of the United States, the more foreign America started to seem to me.
Well, along those lines of American exceptionalism, maybe you could touch on,
Yeah.
which I find really fascinating as an American who's lived abroad, is the idea of like how you feel about both Iran and Tajikistan in terms of living there, like in
Mm.
terms of your security, your feelings of freedom, your feelings of compared to the US, because I think a lot of Americans would look at you and they'd be like, you have kids and a wife who's Tajikistan. Why in the world aren't you in America? Like that doesn't make any sense. Like
Yeah.
of course you're going to bring your wife to America and live in America. Like that's obvious. So like maybe you
Yeah.
could explain like to an American why like a pretend I'm a dumb American and explain to me why I'm not, why you're not doing that. Like yeah.
Oh gosh, that's really complicated. I visited America a couple months ago. I went to visit my parents after the whole time that I was in Iran, I didn't visit the United States. Um, there's a one of the reasons there was a couple of reasons for that, right? One reason was that the situation between the two countries was kind of difficult. So traveling between them was not only very expensive, which I don't have money, a lot of money, right? I'm kind of not a rich person. So I had to think of the expense of traveling and the difficulty of like, you know, what if I go to the United States and for some reason I can't return to Iran or something like that. So I was really like worried about things like that. And so for the first couple of years that I was in Iran, I thought, I'm just going to stay put. It's better for me because I came to spend time in this country and to experience everything. And then after like a couple of years had passed, and a couple summers went by. We visited my wife's family in Tajikistan. It was very close by and convenient. There's a direct flight between Mashhad and Dushanbe, and it's like a 90-minute flight. So like you just spend like an hour on an airplane, and you can be in Tajikistan from Iran. So like in terms of convenience and cost, we spent a couple summers with my wife's family, and then finally I was like, you know what, I miss my family so much. This was like 2019 or so, right? Very, very bad timing. I was like, definitely next summer, I am going to the United States. No matter what, I have to see my mom and dad. And then, and then the pandemic happened, and I was like, oh, I gotta, I have to stay put, right? Like I couldn't, people. I had some foreign classmates in Ferdowsi University who, when the pandemic reached Iran, they left immediately. They were like, we have to leave now. And I was there and I was like, I have to finish my degree, right? Like I went so far, I did so much, and now that I'm so close to getting my degree, I was like, I can't chance it, right? Like I can't leave Iran and not know when I'm ever going to come back. So because of the pandemic and everything, yeah, we stayed until I graduated. And then I visited the United States, and it was Ramadan, so I was there for Eid al-Fitr, and I talked to people at my masjid. Some of them were immigrants, right? Like I talked to immigrants from Iran, and they were like saying what you said, like what are you doing? Like I was telling that they're like, how are you? How's your wife? And I was like, yeah, she's good. My wife is pregnant with twins, but yeah, like you were saying, uh, the way that things worked out with us having kids and everything, it was just, we didn't have much of a choice in terms of, where the babies were going to be born, because, you know, we decided to have kids while we were living in Iran. And so my wife was pregnant by the time I graduated, and she was pretty close to delivery. She was like a month or two away, 2 months, maybe 3 months. So she was starting to enter the third trimester. And we couldn't stay in Iran because I graduated, and I wasn't a student anymore. So this was one problem, and we thought about it. We had friends in Iran who were telling us like, stay, have the babies here, and it's better. And the healthcare in Iran is excellent. Like it would have been a really great place for the kids to be born. And of course, also I would have been so proud, to have my children born in Mashhad, right? That would have been great for me as well. But we considered everything, and we're like, you know what? We don't have any family in Iran. And the way the situation is going is we're going to have to go back to Tajikistan anyway. And her mom is there, her family is there. So she in Tajikistan, she has this whole support system. And if the kids are born in Tajikistan, they will also get to be Tajik citizens. And so basically like we took everything into consideration, and even the possibility of having the kids born in America was like too far-fetched, because we could apply for my wife to get a visa to travel to the United States, but it would have taken too long. So by the time she'd have gotten it, the babies would have been born anyway. So it was like Dushanbe was the only place that realistically that the kids could have been born. And so when I visited the U.S. and I was talking to like this one of these ladies who was like, she was an immigrant from Iran, like one of, I don't know, she was like my friend's mom or something, or aunt. And she was just asking me like, how are things? And I was like, yeah, my wife's in Tajikistan. We're about to have kids, and she was just like, why don't you have them in the United States? And I was like, well, it's not convenient, right? Like and of course it maybe not was not even possible, but she was very upset about it. And I was like, I couldn't understand. I was like, what? I was like, why should we have them in the United States? And she couldn't explain it. She was just like, well, it's better. And I was like, in what way is it better? Like, you tell me. And I guess they were afraid that the children would not be U.S. citizens. And I was like, no, look, they get U.S. citizenship through me. The only thing that would happen is that they couldn't be president of the United States. And I was like, do you think,
That's great.
right? Do you think my kids would become president of the United States? I don't think so, right? Like, I don't even,
Oh, that's the funniest.
I don't know if I would want that for them. So like, even like just this one thing was like, I just couldn't understand that they had already like people, and these are people who themselves had grown up outside of the United States, and then after they moved there, they developed this point of view that like only the United States is good, everywhere else in the world is bad. I just couldn't understand that.
So
It
you
was
have
really
twins?
strange. Yeah, twins.
How much did it cost you to have twins, just in the healthcare costs analysis in Tajikistan? Do you think, like the whole hospital stay?
Okay, so yeah, I can break it down for you a little bit. Of course, we did something which not everyone's going to be able to do. My wife is, her family is Tajik, and like her mom, she knows what's up. Like, she understands everything about, she knows how to work the system. So my wife was able to give birth in a public hospital, and which you might not want to do if you were living in Tajikistan, but somehow they've got the system of, like, in Iran, they call it party bazi, which is like somebody, like my her mom's cousin's neighbor was like a good doctor, and like was able to recommend a surgeon for, because it was going to be a C-section. So we were able to keep tabs on everything to make sure that my wife had a good a good surgeon, and people at the hospital, that they were taking good care of her. So my mother-in-law, she was there to oversee everything, and they gave tips to the nurses and everything. So, but in terms of what my wife got, was that she had a C-section delivery for twins. She stayed in the hospital for, I want to say, 5 days or 6 days, maybe. So like five days in the hospital, and we paid for all of the. So we paid for all of the medicine. You have to buy the medications and everything. So, for example, the surgeon will say, even for the procedure, they'll say, like, this is what we need in order to do it. You go to the pharmacy and you buy it and you bring it. So we paid for all the drugs and medicine. We paid for the hospital stay and the surgery. And I think the grand total, um, you're not going to believe this, but the grand total was something like $600, like, out of pocket. So there's no insurance or anything. and that's just how much it costs here. So, you know, I don't know how much it would have cost in the United States, but my wife she had Googled it. She looked online, like how much does is does delivery cost in the U.S. And she was looking at figures, like thousands and thousands of dollars, and she was like, "What? I would never have a baby there. It's too expensive." And
Yeah, I
and
think you
so
saved at least 10 times the. You were at least.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe like insurance. I don't know what insurance could pay for or anything like that. But over here, we didn't really have to worry about it.
Wow. Well, that's an
Do you,
interesting aspect of it.
yeah, do you know how much it would have cost you if it was in Iran, if you were in Iran? Like, do you have any idea?
It probably would have been similarly affordable. I don't know exactly how much it would have cost, but for example, while we were living in Mashhad, we paid for our own medical expenses also. Like a couple things, right? I got sick with COVID-19, so I had COVID, and fortunately, it was not life-threatening, but I visited the hospital many times while I was sick with COVID, and we paid for that out of pocket. And my wife also had she had laser eye surgery. That was one of the things we did in Iran, and all of that. It was really it was for us. It was affordable. Really, we had no problem.
And what about the
We had
quality of the service that you received? Like
oh, it's
how would
great.
you
Yeah,
describe?
I think the quality was very very high in Iran. Uh, I I have had a bad experience. One of my bad experiences was I went to the dentist, like the medical college at Ferdowsi University, for a dental procedure, and whoever saw me at the dental clinic, they wanted to do this bogus thing that like I'll tell you what it was. I was having, like, my gums were bleeding, so I had gingivitis or something, and I went there just for a consultation. I wanted them to tell me what was wrong, like why are my gums bleeding, and it was probably like a combination of like diet and stress, which that was the conclusion that I came to, is that I should have just eaten more, taken vitamins or something, and the moving to another country is also very stressful. So anyway, I saw this dentist, and the dentist was like, "Oh, we need to do this procedure. We need to do like a free, like, graft. We need to. What it is it's a procedure where they take tissue from the roof of your mouth, and they try to graft it
Mhm.
onto your gums so that you have more gums protecting the root of your teeth."
Mhm.
And it's a procedure that many people have done, actually. But this person, like, basically misrepresented the procedure. Like, they oversold it. They were like, "Oh,
Mhm.
it's so simple, it's so easy, like you just in 15 minutes you're out." And it was cheap too, right? So I was thinking, like, well, should I do this because it's very cheap? And I talked to my family, and that, like, we had, like, oh, my nephew had this procedure done as well, and I was like, okay, well, I guess it's a legit thing, right? And I had the procedure done, and I totally regretted it. Like, it was a horrible, horrible procedure. I left with stitches, like, in the roof of my mouth, and it was bleeding.
Oh.
And yeah, and I did it like the weekend before final exams. It was like my first semester at Ferdowsi University, so I had to go into exams with, like, I was like in pain and everything. Uh, but anyway, that was one case anyway that I was like, man, this
Mhm.
I really shouldn't have done this, but
I think that was
uh,
like unnecessary.
it was
Just wanted
unnecessary,
to.
right? But I have to tell you, overall, everything else was perfect. And I'll give you a good example of what was one thing that was really great. Was we used to go to this hospital in Mashhad, and because it was very affordable, we would have, any time that we needed, we would get blood work done. For example, like, we would do regular, like, check, cholesterol and all of that stuff, just for general health. And so at this hospital, I had blood drawn several times. And I guess my veins are thin or something, so it's hard to draw blood from me. um, I had it done in the United States unsuccessfully. So in my hometown, I had gone to a hospital and they needed to draw blood for a test, and the nurse couldn't do it and tried unsuccessfully 2 times or 3 times and had to call another nurse and was like, I can't do this. And so I already knew that this was something that could happen. And when I was in Iran and they would draw blood, they never ever had any issue whatsoever. The guy was it was different people every time. Like it was all the different nurses, like young guys working at the hospital, and they did a perfect job every time. They would find the vein, they would stick the needle in. I didn't feel a thing, and they did it so fast, and it was just they never had an issue, and I was like, huh, these guys are like, so that's phlebotomy. I was like, these phlebotomists are like excellent at their job. And then I came to Tajikistan, and I had to have a test done for in order to get a visa. This is one of the legal requirements in Tajikistan. To get a visa to stay in Tajikistan, you have to give an HIV test. And we went to this clinic. It was a horrible clinic. It was one of the we went to this clinic because it was one of the fancy ones in Dushanbe. It was like one of the well-known, supposedly good quality clinics, and for that reason they charge you more than other places. So I had to go in to have this HIV test done for my visa application, and I had in the past done this before in Tajikistan, going to public hospitals, and it was very simple. They would just, that they would prick the tip of your finger and they would give you the result right away. And we decided to go to this place because it was near our house, and we were like, oh, it's a nice place, right? They should have it good. And you know what? It was horrible. They didn't want to prick my finger. They wanted to draw a vial of blood in order to do an HIV test. And then they told us like, oh, it's our policy that we can't, you can't buy a single test. You have to have at least two. You have to buy at least 2 tests. And right. And so they charged us too much money. Well, it ended up costing like about $10, which you wouldn't, as an American, wouldn't mind paying that much, but in Tajikistan, that's like a what is it, a crazy fee to pay for such a procedure.
Mhm.
Um, but I was already upset about they they were ripping us off on the service, and then by the time that they had to draw the blood, the lady did such a bad job. It was horrible that I guess she missed the vein, or she picked a wrong, like the artery, like it wasn't a main artery, but it was something, she hit the wrong spot. So she drew the blood with some difficulty, and then for like the whole day my arm was sore because she did such a bad job. And then even after she took the blood, she knew that she did a bad job, and she was like, I am so sorry that it was painful for you. And I was like, oh, it's fine. At the time I didn't mind so much. It was actually the pain came later after I left. But that just goes to show you that, like, if I were to compare like the quality of healthcare between Tajikistan and Iran, that's like night and day. Like Iran is like very, like, everything is perfect and professional. They do a wonderful job. The doctors that I saw in Iran, they were wonderful. Like, um, I felt like when I talked to them that they genuinely listened and they cared about what was wrong with me. Like when I got COVID, I went to see doctors multiple times. They just seemed genuinely empathetic. Like I couldn't, like, I had seen doctors in the United States before. Like I had a doctor in my hometown where, like, I had a very serious problem, and it was upsetting me, and I went to see my doctor, and as I was trying to, like, I was like 1 minute into explaining to him what was wrong, and he just said like, uh, "Can you please hurry up because I have to see other patients." Right?
That's,
Oh,
that's
wow.
So
America.
like, yeah. So
Oh, wow.
everyone,
Because that's, yeah. Okay.
yeah. So everyone in Iran was lovely, and they did a good job. So I would, I think I would rather, I don't know, maybe it depends on, the procedure or what it is you're doing, but I think most of the time I'd rather go to a hospital in Iran than I would in the United States. Yeah.
Medical tourism is a new big thing apparently in Iran. I heard from tour guide friends
Yeah,
there.
yeah. And I don't want to, I don't want to be like, oh, you should go and like take advantage of like how much less it costs you. But I just am trying to say that regardless of the cost, the quality was excellent.
How do people in Tajikistan afford $600 to have kids though? Because that's a pretty sizable.
Well, yeah, a lot of, I mean, you could pay it, but that's a hefty fee. That's like you were kind of saying, if you were in America and you
Yeah,
paid like 10 times that much, that's what it would be like for a Tajik family. So
exactly.
$600 in Tajikistan, that's like for a Tajik family, that's like they have to pay $10,000 for something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not everyone maybe could afford it.
Yeah. Huh. Well, that's a big difference.
Hmm.
How is it in terms of like the expat community there? Do you know other Americans in Tajikistan?
Not really. That's also one of the funny things was that when I moved to Tajikistan in 2014, I was living in Tajikistan like a Tajik person would live because I had my family, right? I got married, and so I lived with my in-laws, and I spoke the language. So living here, and there was a bit of a language barrier, right? Like Tajik people, they do speak Persian, but they speak with an accent that's quite different from people in Iran. Although once I became more fluent in Persian, the difference started to seem smaller and smaller, right? As a learner of the language, the difference in dialect was kind of or accent was a little bit difficult to overcome. So having studied like standard Iranian Persian in university, when I arrived in Tajikistan, I was still finding that yeah, I could communicate with people, but it was a challenge, right? Sometimes I had to like negotiate with them, like, what are you talking about? And if they talked enough, I was like, okay, I get what you're saying. But yeah, I over in spite of the culture shock and everything, because Tajikistan was also part of the Soviet Union. Soviet countries are really different, um, and in some ways, even Iran is more similar to the United States than a country like Tajikistan, because the USSR is just really something else. So I came here confronted with like all of this differences in culture and language, but then after a couple of years, I had adjusted sufficiently to the point where I felt totally free living in Dushanbe, like it was just a completely normal place. I could just go out, I could go anywhere, do anything, I could talk to anyone. It just felt normal. And so just the fact that I kind of I feel like I was doing a good job of fitting in Tajikistan in spite of the fact of being a foreign person. um, I didn't have a need to like maintain like this circle of like foreign friends. Like I didn't want to be in a bubble of people who speak English, because like um, my heart was with like the Persian language. So so yeah, I kind of like I had no connection to like expats or anything. And what was funny is that Tajik people sometimes they would find this weird, because like I would meet people in Tajikistan, and like um, you know sometimes it would be like kind of annoying to me to meet people who are like overly interested in the United States, because like I'm not as interested in it as they are.
Exactly.
So like so like I mean it was much worse in Iran actually.
I was going to
But
say that I was
yeah,
going to
yeah.
ask you because I was expecting you to say that
Yeah,
it's
yeah, but
worse.
in
Yeah.
Tajikistan also some people like I would meet these people who like they were just a little bit too interested in America, and they would like try to speak English with me, and they were like, "Oh, I want to go to America." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure you do, right?" Like, um, but what that was one of the things that they would kind of be like, they would meet me, and then they would start telling me about every American that they knew.
Exactly.
And then, you know what? You've had this experience before, probably. So they're like, "You're from
Yeah.
America," and they're like, "Oh, do you know Joe? I know Joe. Like, have you ever met him?" And it's like, "No, I don't know these people."
Uh,
Right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
is there a military presence? Like, does the U.S. have a military presence in some sort of military presence in
Oh,
Tajikistan? And do people know about it? Like, how do Tajik people like think and feel about it in your experience?
well, the U.S. has an embassy. That's
That
definitely
counts.
It,
something. And I have to say, like, I've been to a lot of embassies in Dushanbe, and also in Iran. I've been to a few different embassies, and the American embassy is always the worst. It's the worst one. It's like the security is insane. Like, you go, like, I'm a U.S. citizen, right? You know, you go in there and they treat you like you're a criminal or something. Like,
Yep.
just you're living outside of the United States. It's like you're all of a sudden you're one of them, right? Like they wouldn't like last
mm,
time I visited the U.S. embassy, they wouldn't let me wear my watch, right? Like,
oh,
and I don't know if they had something against me or whatever, because the lady that went in front of me, they didn't ask her to remove her watch, but then they were looking at me and they're like, you take off your watch, and I was like, like I have a
mm,
U.S. passport. Like, what are you thinking? And
Yeah.
so anyway, it's like high security. You feel like you're going into a military base. It was always an unpleasant experience. But other than this embassy that the United States has in Dushanbe, which is it's a fairly large compound. They built a big embassy. Um, Ostensibly because of the proximity to Afghanistan, which is
mhm.
what every country is worried about. I mean, that's why that's like
They
why
beefed up.
Russia is here. Yeah,
They
yeah.
beefed up their embassies all around the world after the bombings, and they use that as an excuse to spend a lot of
Sh
money. So, like, even
Sure.
in Uganda
Yeah.
or Nairobi, they have these sprawling compounds that are like totally
In
unnecessary.
Iraq too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can understand that they feel that there's a threat, but I kind of as an American living in Tajikistan, I never feel threatened in Tajikistan. So this country feels safe and normal to me. So I kind of feel like, well, if people they have, something, as Malcolm X said, right, that when chickens come home to roost, it's like the United States kind of knows that people are out to get them. So
Mhm.
they have to beef up the security. As far as I know, in terms of military presence, I know that the United States does some really simple, basic cooperation with the Tajik military, but I don't think there's a U.S. military presence here. I think sometimes they invite the Tajik military to come to the United States for training. Sometimes they give them things like some equipment or something, but as far as I know. There's only a Russian military base, which is the
Mhm.
main thing. So Russia has like a whole like division here. Tajikistan is more in Russia's sphere of influence, and so the United States doesn't really have a strong foothold in Tajikistan. Um, but they do, they're friends with Tajikistan, so to speak. So they try to, have this small relationship that they have. They try to build on it. Um, and aside from the Russian military base, India also has an air base inside Tajikistan. That's all that I know.
Mm, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the U.S. had air bases in Kyrgyzstan and in
Mm.
Uzbekistan, but now that all the air bases in Afghanistan aren't even American anymore, I don't think they're operational either. So I think the
Didn't
whole
Uzbekistan ask them to leave?
yeah,
Like
they did.
yeah,
Yeah.
I remember something about that.
And then the Manas base in Bishkek took over, and then I think they're closed down now too, for the most part. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's basically like a full pullout of from Central Asia. But uh, yeah, well what I guess I'm pretty much out of questions, unless you wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I think that pretty much wrapped it up for me. That's very interesting. I would love to um, you know,
Yeah,
continue the conversation in the future, and maybe see how that's continuing for you living in Tajikistan. I mean, I've always wanted to
yes.
go there. I lived in Kyrgyzstan, and I think it's a fascinating place. So um, that
Well, Tajikistan is the sort of place that for general interest, if you're just a regular like world traveler, for example, I wouldn't recommend Tajikistan to every tourist. Like, I think that one of the main things that Tajikistan has to offer is the this kind of like specialness of the fact that Tajikistan has a Persian culture in contrast with its neighbors. Like, Kyrgyzstan is more of it's a Turkic
yeah.
country. Tajikistan stands out in that way. So if you have some interest in like Persian language or Iranian culture or something like that, Tajikistan would definitely be an interesting destination. And we do have like there's the beauty of the mountains and everything. So if you haven't like if you're going to bother to come all the way out to remote Tajikistan, you should at least visit Badakhshan, right? You should go to the Pamir Mountains. You should visit like the Wakhan Valley and see these really like spectacular and hard to reach places as well. Like the only as if Tajikistan wasn't remote enough, right? In order to get to like the Wakhan Valley, you have to spend like days in like an off-road vehicle as it's like going through the mountains and everything. So like it's really a superb experience if you can make it out to. I felt like I was very privileged to see like one of the most like remote places in the planet. Um, but if you're not willing to go that far, or you just kind of want to have like a fun little like Central Asia adventure, right? I would definitely recommend that people visit Uzbekistan. And Uzbekistan is really it has so much to offer in terms of architecture and a lot of that's part of Iranian history as well. So you can go to Uzbekistan and see like Samarkand and Bukhara, which are like two of the most like famous Iranian cities ever. And then you can also see like the beautiful architecture in Khiva, which is the historical region of Khwarazm. And so yeah, I would recommend to most people who are starting to like get into Central Asia, I would tell them first go to Uzbekistan and while you're there, you could hop over to Tajikistan. You could combine them into a single trip. So I would definitely recommend that.
I'd add on to that the Kyrgyzstan as well, and the advantage of Kyrgyzstan over Uzbekistan is that the actual logistics in traveling in
Mm,
Kyrgyzstan are a lot more friendly, because in
yeah.
Uzbekistan the police are extremely harassing. So like
Oh
you're gonna
yeah,
you're gonna
yeah.
you're gonna come into a contact with a lot of
Yeah.
bakshish. They're gonna be asking for money at every turn. And in Kyrgyzstan that
Yeah.
really only happens if you're driving. So I had a car there and drove
Yeah.
around, and that's where you start getting into that like harassment. But the Uzbeks are
Tajikistan,
phenomenal
yeah,
for shaking tourists down.
yeah. That's Tajikistan was pretty bad too. I mean, it's kind of endemic to like the Central Asia region, but they have over the past few years they've started to become more tourist friendly. So
That's good.
my my wife and I visited Uzbekistan in 2015, and it was still kind of bad. Like Bukhara and Samarkand were pretty like tourist friendly, like those key destinations. But like when we were going around in Tashkent, for example, we wanted to take the metro everywhere because it was actually really convenient and cheap, and the security was so it was nuts. Like the guards wouldn't let you go into the metro station without like shaking you down. They'd open our bags every time. They'd be like, "Whoa, what do you got in your bags?" Like just to get on the metro. So like things were pretty bad back then. Hopefully they're better now. Uzbekistan has changed a lot in the past
Yeah,
couple
hopefully, yeah.
years since the passing of Islam Karimov. Um, Tajikistan also kind of recently they did a big push for tourism, but it's not so easy to attract people. But just like for example, just this year. Tajikistan started to allow visa-free entry for Americans,
Iranian.
and
Really?
and a
Really?
bunch of other countries. I think
Really?
Iranians
Wow. You should go
still
there.
have to get a visa.
How long has this visa-free travel thing for Americans been going on? Because that's the reason
Since
I never went.
since January.
Wow. Oh, that's
Yeah,
great news. Because
it's
I was
brand
always
new.
gonna go, but it was like such a headache to apply in Bishkek, and like I knew
Yeah,
people who were applying, and it was like a something like $200 fee, and it was like you had to wait forever, and it was so, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. I'm not doing this, and
yeah, and
so
I
I
heard
never did it.
recently that some tourist visa applicants have had their applications just very recently rejected because they mentioned on their application that they were going to visit the Pamir region, and
Yeah,
so
exactly, and that's where I was traveling. So I was
yeah,
like, yeah.
So
yeah,
just don't
there's been
mention it, and
unrest
then you
there.
can. Mhm.
But I
Yeah.
like my goal was to drive overland when I was there. And it was like you have to
Oh,
go through the Palmiers, and so you
you
had to have this
can.
whole extra permit. Well, you could back
Yeah.
then. You could like apply for some extra military permit, and it was just like a super headache. So, but I knew people who did it by bicycle, and apparently, thought when you're on a bike, they didn't really care so much. So it was like, uh,
You're not
yeah,
afraid.
but
So the travel group that I was in, we made it all the way out to this small city called Morghab. And Morghab is like really tiny and remote, like it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's kind of close to the Kyrgyz border.
mhm.
And we were staying the night in like a homestay or something, like a little, this is like a hotel basically, bed and breakfast maybe. And while we were there, um, someone came to us and was, I guess the owners, they were like, does anyone in your group speak Japanese? And we were like, why? And they're like, a Japanese guy has shown up. He crossed overland from Kyrgyzstan to Tajikistan. So a Japanese guy arrived there, and they're like, we can't talk to him because he doesn't know English or Russian or anything. And
Wow.
so just by knowing Japanese only, he was like he hitchhiked like through China and
Wow.
Kyrgyzstan. He had arrived
I
in
met
Tajikistan.
I met a guy
Wow.
from like I think it was Shanghai, a Chinese guy who had walked all the way from Shanghai to Kyrgyzstan, and he was
Oh
walking
my
to
God.
Tajikistan. So there, that Central Asia, you get the most fantastic travelers because it's like it filters out all the normies. You get all these eccentric like adventure seekers who are like unicycling across Kyrgyzstan or what. I mean, this crazy stuff. I
Yeah.
loved that part
Yeah,
of.
we and this another similar experience was when we were staying in a kind of a remote, also a remote village in Iran. Like we went on a trip that was organized by the university, and there one of the guys at the hotel, he came and found me because he needed someone who could speak English. And he's like, "We need you to come talk to this guy who has shown up, and we don't know what to do with him." And it turns out that a Dutch traveler had made it had found his way somehow to this small village in Iran, and I guess he could speak English, but nobody there could speak English,
Mhm.
and so he was there, and I guess looking for a place to stay. And I sort of got the impression that what he was doing in Iran was he was kind of going around hoping that people would put him up for free,
Oh, that's
and
really
Yeah.
common. Yeah,
and
that's
I was kind of thinking like, I don't advise people to do that, right? Like, don't go to Iran expecting like everything to be free for you. I don't think that's very nice, but yeah, Iran is very famous for its hospitality.
it
And
is. Yeah.
speaking of the visa thing, that's a great concern for like my wife and I, because we have different nationalities, and like there's like only three countries that we can go to, both of us can go to without a visa. I mean, sometimes getting a visa
What
is
are those countries?
one of them's Armenia. I
Wow.
think
Okay.
Armenia, Georgia, and there is
Turkey,
another.
probably,
Turkey. I need a visa for Turkey.
Yeah, but you
but
can
it's
get it
on
at the
arrival,
airport. It's
right?
well, it's
Yeah,
But
not.
it's on arrival.
it's an easy visa,
Mhm.
right? I can get an electronic visas are like nothing really. So we could go to Turkey very easily. But if you want like totally like visa free entry, there's basically like the Caucasus, and I think there was some like country in the Persian Gulf that like that we both could have visited, but now I can't remember. So like yeah, we had this problem, and also the relations you know because my wife is Tajik and we went to Iran together, and the relations between Iran and Tajikistan were frequently on the rocks, basically. So the relations between Iran and Tajikistan, and also Central Asia in general, this has also been a big concern for us. Like my wife's sister, her younger sister currently studies in Iran, and her older sister formerly studied in Iran. That's kind of like how I was able to actually go to school there. Was my sister-in-law was a student, and she was able to also kind of be like the go-between. So like we've had multiple family members also study in Iran, and they've had some problems. Like when they come back to Tajikistan, at the airport, the authorities they would try to take away their passport or something, and tell them like don't go back to Iran. But I just wanted to point that out because you were mentioning visa-free travel for Iranians to Uzbekistan, which I really hope that this is true, because I strongly believe in these countries, which are neighbors. I strongly believe in them working together and having close relations with each other. Uzbekistan also recently opened up to Tajikistan. So Tajikistan and Uzbekistan had been in a cold war with each other for many years, because like Islam Karimov, who was the president of Uzbekistan, like he hated Tajikistan. And so like Tajiks could also not, people couldn't travel between the two countries until just like a few years ago. All of a sudden, like they opened the borders, and now like Uzbeks and Tajiks, they can visit each other. There's families that were split across the border. So this was a wonderful, joyous event that happened. And I just, I'm really hoping that, and things, as bad as the current political situation in the world, as bad as it has become, I guess there's kind of like this silver lining that between Central Asia, and which is very dependent on Russia. So between Russia and Iran, there's Central Asia, and they kind of like they're being drawn together more. So if Tajikistan can become better friends with Iran, I think that would also be it would be a wonderful thing, like for me and my family, for example. I would love to see that, relations improve between Tajikistan and Iran, and Russia, for example. So
Do you think that alienation, like political alienation of Iran, like you described when your connections were arriving at the airport and they were questioned, do you think that is stemming from the sphere that's more the Russian sphere or the U.S. sphere of influence? Do you think where's that like Iran phobia coming from Tajikistan?
There's a long story behind that. I don't know how much time we have, but some of it is unique. Yeah.
We can wrap it up whenever.
So some of it is unique to Tajikistan. Okay, so like for example, sometimes I notice that like Russia, for example, Russia has better relations with Iran than Tajikistan does.
Wow.
Tajikistan kind of feels this. There's this anxiety about because Iran speaks the same language. They both speak Persian, and there's this. Tajikistan is like it's very small, and Iran is very large. That kind of creates an imbalance in their relationship. So sometimes Tajikistan feels threatened by Iran. That like, and possibly this is unwarranted, but they think that like sometimes they say like, oh, Iran's going to come and like take over, and you have this post-Soviet political establishment which does not feel very good about Islam as a religion. And so when they come into contact with Iran, which is a religious, government, they feel like, oh, this is really scary because we don't know, like, is Iran going to incite Tajiks to rise up and overthrow the secular government in Tajikistan? Like there's all these wild things that they think like they just Tajikistan in a lot of ways, it's a very closed off country. They don't like change in general. So like it's better for like the ruling class in Tajikistan that things kind of got to stay the same as they were before. For example, there's an anecdote about recently. People have been complaining about the internet being slow in Dushanbe. Like the internet here is compared to Iran, it's slower and much more expensive. And people complain about it. And some politician or something was quoted as saying like, well, what if people want the internet for? Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
That's great. Oh wow, I'm really loving
Yeah.
Tajikistan now. That's fantastic. That's a
But
place to be right now.
Tajikistan is improving every year that I've been here. Hasn't been very long, but I've seen marked improvement year after year. The country is uh, advancing a bit. It's opening up, little by little. It's opening up more. I think there's a few episodes in Tajikistan's relationship with Iran that things hit a low point in like 2015, and I think now we're just kind of reaching a point where they're starting to like really get over those things, and if they can put the past behind them, I think they can be just more comfortable with each other.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
Just
do you have
some
any
random
other?
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you know any Persian poem by heart? Like, can you remember anything that you particularly like and you can tell us?
Oh, I am horrible at memorization. Like I really like I
Me too.
graduated from Ferdowsi University with a degree in Persian literature. I did not
wow.
memorize things. And this might have been to the chagrin of some of my professors because, Persian literature is possibly one of the oldest majors in Iran in history. So like when the first universities were like opening in Iran, like Persian literature was one of the things you could study, like alongside, I don't know what else they had, like medicine and law or whatever it is that they had. Um, but it's a very traditional major, right? It's still very focused on reading classical literature. Um, you know, the major is called Persian Language and Literature, right? And I liked, the language part more than the literature part.
Right.
Um, right, but it did actually, all those courses that I had to take about classical works and classical poets. It did have a positive effect on me. So it helped
Mhm.
me to get more into Persian literature than I otherwise would have been. But yeah, I memorized like one line, and
Can
everybody,
you?
everybody knows it. It's not special or anything. It's, uh, Tawana bovad har ki dana bovad zidanish dilipir borna bovad. Right.
Perfect.
Yeah, sure. So this one that I recited, it says so Tawana bovad har ki dana bovad. It's whoever has knowledge, whoever is knowledgeable is strong, is powerful, right? Like knowledge is power. And then the second part is Zidanish dilipir borna bovad. It means that from or with knowledge, an old heart becomes young. So I guess this is
And
also about
who's that
the.
poem by?
Oh, it's got to be Ferdowsi, right? An interesting word in this poem, borna, right? Borna is an interesting word. I just recently, now I teach English in Dushanbe. Um, I had a student just last month. Her name was Barna, which is the same word. The accent is a little bit different. Um, but actually, that was Tajiks have a very beautiful culture when it comes to Persian language. So this was actually somebody's name. But
I have.
the word, yeah. So Borna means young. It's not commonly used in Persian anymore, but the word has an interesting evolution. So I'm just going to leave you with this because I have a great interest in Persian philology. Like I like etymology. Um, in ancient Persian, there's this word purnak. Purnak, it means old, right? So like in Persian, we have the word pir, and if you put ah in front of the word, it forms the opposite of that, which we have this in some English words as well. So apurnak is the opposite of old. It means young. And what happened is that as the Persian language evolved over time, the beginning and the end of the word actually fell off. So the ah was lost, and also the k, the knock, the k dropped, and so what was left of the word is borna, and that's what we find in this poem.
But
That's very
Bornab
interesting.
then means old, or it means young, which
It
does
means
mean?
young. The meaning didn't change.
But both
The
fell
form
off, so
changed.
both had to fall off in order to create that meaning. If just one fell off, it would have, like, because you would have board,
Oh,
right? So that would
that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure, but you're right. The thing is that even though the meaning has been preserved, so the word means the same thing now as it did before, but the form has changed a lot. We wouldn't people who speak Persian today, they wouldn't look at that word and say like, oh, I see that this word has a suffix or a prefix. They wouldn't see anything
Interesting.
like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you said it's a name for girls in Tajikistan, right?
Yes, I met someone who has that name. I met people with a lot of interesting names here. Yeah.
Yeah, in Iran also it's a name, but I know I probably have just known guys with that name, so it's interesting.
Oh,
That
wow. This is
yeah,
interesting.
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Sometimes the gender changes. So like for example, another example which is pretty famous is that Ilham. Ilham is a boy's name in
Mm,
Tajikistan. Yeah.
right,
In
yeah.
Iran it's usually for girls or
And yeah,
always.
in the Arab world and in Iran, it's for girls.
It could.
We should
Uh,
probably wrap it up here because I think if anyone's continued listening through the whole
yeah, we
like
probably
long
will
tail of
have.
this,
Congratulations.
Yeah,
congratulations.
I appreciate anyone who could listen to me talk for this long. Apparently some people can. I don't believe.
We enjoyed it.
Um,
well, yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.